go on to page 2, slide 2? Just a quick reminder of where we've been and where we're going. This is chapter 2 of Paying for College. So last week we talked a lot about the decisions that you need to think about before you even think about the paying part, and which is what kind of college you want to go to, the type of degree that you're looking for, and then different costs for different types of college. So today we're going to get into a lot more information about funding, the types of money that you can get to help you pay for school. And we'll do that in some detail, but there is certainly a lot more detail that you will have to look into when you are thinking about your own personal circumstances. But there are 2 more parts to this presentation that are coming up after chapter 2, and they're about other kinds of schooling opportunities, specifically trade schools and other kinds of continuing education in chapter 4, the 4th week. So with that, can we go on to slide 3, please? So let's jump right into 2 big kinds of funding for college. They are grants and scholarships. Now, what's the difference between a grant and a scholarship? And that's a good question because many people mix them up. And there are a lot of similarities. With grants and scholarships, you're getting money that helps you to pay for college. And normally, with both grants and scholarships, you don't have to pay the money back. And we'll give you some examples in a minute so that you understand when you have to pay the money back. Now, grants are normally from the federal or state government. Sometimes they come from colleges as well, but normally the most common ones are from either the federal government, the U.S. government, or from the state, like Maryland. Whereas scholarships are coming from companies, whether it's McDonald's or Ford Motor or a small company in Rockville, nonprofits. And a nonprofit is an organization that doesn't try to make money, like the Literacy Council. We're a nonprofit. And then there are many, many community groups and some of them do sponsor scholarships. Examples would be churches and other local organizations that get together that want to help the people in their community. And keep in mind when you think about scholarships, whereas a grant is driven by a person's financial need, a scholarship is normally determined by a person's special ability, talent, or performance in school. Somebody who's very good at school might qualify for a special scholarship. Somebody who is very good at sports or is interested in engineering, has a talent for engineering. Those would be examples and the difference between a scholarship normally and a grant. So with that, can we go on to the next slide? And Anne?
All right, welcome everyone. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about grants. What are grants? So as Bob just said, grants are money from the federal or state government or sometimes the college. Usually you don't have to pay the money back. However, as Bob mentioned, sometimes you do have to pay the money back. And an example of when you would have to do that, pay the money back, is if you get additional funds or more money from another source. So sometimes that will count towards your grant money and your grant will be lower or you'll have to pay it back, or part of it, not always all of it, but can be just part of it. And certainly if you drop a course or courses, or drop out of your degree program altogether, you will definitely have to pay all or some of the money back. Okay? Usually with a grant, the application is fairly simple, and we'll be talking about some particular kinds of grants in a minute. The awards, as Bob said, are usually need-based. So if you have a low income and you really don't have any savings, you'll be more likely to get good grant money or a higher, what we call, award. So you'll get more money usually if you are very low income and you don't have much savings. Okay, otherwise, if you already have some savings and maybe you have a part-time job, then the award or amount of money you receive might be a bit lower. Okay, and usually also with a grant, you do have to apply every year. So the grant will be good for the 1 year, and then you have to apply again. And the amount differ. If your circumstances have changed, then the amount that you're awarded from your federal grant may be a little different. Okay, next slide, please. On the other hand, the scholarships, as Bob said again, this is money from companies, nonprofit organizations, or groups. You usually do not have to pay the money back, even if you get awards from other places or other money given to you by way of grants or scholarships. Usually you don't have to pay it back. Interestingly, scholarships, there is usually no limit to the number of scholarships that you can get. So you might get a scholarship from your church, you might get another scholarship from maybe the company that you work for. So you can get, you know, a whole bunch of scholarships. They do not exclude each other. So just because you've got several scholarships doesn't mean you have to juggle them. It means that you can accept them all. What it may affect is your grant money. Okay, more scholarships sometimes means less grant money. Now, again, as Bob mentioned, these are usually awarded because of your good grades, some kind of talent that you have, could be academic, could be in sports, could even be that you're fantastic at playing a musical instrument. So there are all kinds of talents that you might have that you could get a scholarship. And maybe sometimes other circumstances. So, you know, for example, even people who have a disability, say, there are special scholarships for that. So scholarships cover a very, very, very wide range of circumstances, and it's well worth Googling them to find out what might fit your special circumstances or your abilities. They're usually very competitive. This means that a lot of people want those scholarships. And I will tell you that usually the bigger the scholarship, the more people are applying for it, or the more competitive it is. Okay, so you're up against a lot of other people if it's thousands and thousands of dollars. On the other hand, there may be scholarships that are $500 for the year or $1,000 for the year. And these tend to be a bit less competitive or less people applying for them, because all of these scholarships usually do have quite a lot of paperwork involved. And obviously people will be more prepared to fill out a lot of paperwork for a big scholarship than a small scholarship. So oftentimes you might find a number of small scholarships that less people are applying for, so you might be more likely to get. Okay, so please bear that in mind. Now, some of these scholarship applications, as I just said, are very, very complicated and long. So they're not impossible to fill out, but they can be a little bit more challenging. And oftentimes they do require something like an essay. So, you know, be prepared that these will take you a little bit more time to fill out. But, you know, again, it can be very, very well worth it. You may have to apply every year. So sometimes scholarships are for 4 years, and sometimes they are only actually for 1 year. So, you know, it all depends on the scholarship. And some examples, we already mentioned possibly church scholarships. For example, my church offers a scholarship each year, which I think is about $500, but, you know, well worth applying for. So look into, you know, things like your church. If you work for a company, oftentimes companies, especially the bigger companies, you know, maybe Target or Walmart, if you even have a part-time job at one of those places, they may offer scholarship programs. Also, if you are a child of what we would call a veteran, which means somebody who was in the Army or the Air Force or some other branch of the armed forces. So children of veterans, there are a number of scholarships available. And certainly if you are a veteran yourself or you served in the armed forces, there are also scholarships available to you. So what I can say here is please, please, please do some Googling and research and just pull up, you know, any kind of scholarship that might apply to you. It is well worth filling in the paperwork because you never know which of these you're going to get. And I think somebody posted a question. Ralph, could you read me out the question, please? I think someone Deepak put up a question.
Yes. She says, I co-signed my nephew's grant for dental school. What are the implications? And how does it affect my credit score now? Because he is still in the school, so payments are not due yet.
So I'll just answer that briefly. So the obligation that you have is if your relative defaults, then you are responsible for the loan. Okay, so that's really what you've do. And we will talk a little bit more about co-signing, but essentially the primary responsibility is your relative who's in dental school. If your relative though defaults and does not pay the loan, then you become legally responsible. Co-signing may or may not affect your credit score. It may not all that much, but you know, it's just something that it's difficult to predict. You'll just have to keep an eye on it. Definitely, it's likely to affect your credit score if it comes that there is a default, the loan becomes your loan. Okay, so it's definitely going to be affected quite a bit then. Up until then, it may be affected a little bit. I don't think it's likely to be affected. Okay, so with that, let's move on to our next slide. And let's go back to Bob.
Okay, so let's focus back on finding out a little bit more about federal grants. How do you find out about these grants? There's a specific website. It's www.studentaid.gov. And here you will find the information for the 4 federal grants that are available. So this is from the US government. This is for everybody in the country. Probably the most well-known is the federal Pell Grant. This is for undergrads, and most of these grants are for people who are going to college, not graduate school. So these are for undergraduates. The amount is up to $6,000, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a grant based on need. So this means it's important for the student to understand his or her financial information, what is available to pay for college when he or she is applying for the grant. And that is true of all grants. The Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant is a lot of words, but really this is let's think of it as a backup source of money for those students where they have an enormously large need for support for money, and $6,000 is not going to be enough. This would be a backup source of money from the federal government. The third one, Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, is related to those people who are children of individuals who served in the US military and were killed during either the Iraq or Afghanistan wars. So this is very specific to a much smaller group of people. So anyone who is not in that set of circumstances, that situation, of course, would not qualify for this particular grant. So a different type of grant. And then finally, an even longer title, Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education Grant. Basically, this is a government program for helping those people who are interested in teaching. Again, it's for undergraduates or people who are going to graduate school and they're interested in teaching, so they want to get a degree in teaching. I believe the award can be up to about almost $4,000. And these individuals, if they apply and get the grant, would have to commit to teaching for 4 years as part of the program that the US government is funding. So as you can see, there are different types of grants for different types of students. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Now let's switch to state grants. And so since we're in the state of Maryland, we're going to talk about the state of Maryland and what the state of Maryland offers. And this is just part of what you can find online, but we wanted to highlight and share with you some examples. So where you go to get the information is online, of course, Maryland Higher Education Commission, that website. And if you go out there, there's an awful lot of information about education in the state of Maryland around colleges and universities. But when you look for grants, you'll see some of these. You'll see more than this list, but we've chosen a few just to give you some ideas. So I'm going to talk about 3. The Guaranteed Access Grant. This is for undergraduates under 26 years old. So this is specifically for the younger people coming out of high school or who have a GED, and they're trying to help these individuals get into college and get through college. The award can be up to almost $19,000, so it's quite large. And it's obviously a strong commitment from the state of Maryland to try to help people get into and through college, because obviously the larger the grant, the easier it is for the student to get into school and stay in school. And just to remind you, of course, the grants are based on need primarily. How much money do you need? Not any particular skill or talent. If we move on to, for example, the 2+2 transfer scholarship, this is a little bit different focus. So this is support for those people who want to start at a 2-year college. And remember, we talked about that last week, starting at a community college and then switching to a 4-year college later. For this particular program, there's awards of $1,000 for, let's call it regular students, but if you're interested in teaching, if you're interested in nursing, if you're interested in mathematics, the award is doubled to $2,000. So again, the state of Maryland is trying to encourage those people in those areas by offering a larger grant. And then finally, that last one, Community College Promise Scholarship. This is specifically for those individuals who are interested in getting their degree at a community college. They're not interested in going on. And this would be an opportunity, a grant up to $5,000 to go to a community college. So these are just some examples of what you can find on the website. There are other types of grants that are more narrowly defined, a smaller group of people. As Anne mentions, children of veterans, for example, and the like. But these are some of the more obvious ones that more people could qualify for. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Anne. And next slide.
All right, so we've talked about grants and scholarships. What if they're not enough? What if I still need more money to fund my college experience? Okay, the way to go would be a student loan. And please do remember, look for grants and scholarships first. Student loans are going to be what you looked for after you've exhausted the possibility of money from grants and scholarships. So with a student loan, this is money that you are going to have to repay. So you have to determine how much debt you can handle. You have to make sure you're going to be able to pay back that loan. And if it's going to take you a couple of decades, then maybe it's not worth it. So really, you have to look very carefully at how much debt you think you can pay back in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable amount of repayment each month. You got to shop around for the best deal, and we'll be talking a lot more about that. And there are different sources that you can use to get your student loan. For example, you can get loans from the federal government, or you can get loans from private companies or private entities. And we're going to talk some more about that in a minute too. So on the next slide, let's talk about how much debt you can handle. So we've done some little calculations here just to give you an example, okay? So in general, the rule of thumb, the guiding line, is that you should have a repayment of your debt that should be 10% or less of the that you are earning after you graduate. That's postgraduate income. That's after paying taxes, okay? And there is a website, so I recommend that you go and have a look at this website. It's called Loan Payment Calculator, and it will help you figure out, based on various things, how much you can afford easily to repay. Okay, so we're going to give you a little example here. We're going to use Maria, and we're going to talk about Maria's experience and how much she can afford to repay. So Maria is actually planning to go to a 4-year college. She wants to be an accountant. So we know that roughly, on average, an accountant who has just graduated will earn ballpark maybe $50,000 per year, okay? So based on that, how much debt is she going to be able to borrow that she can repay? So how much debt is she going to need for all those 4 years? And remember, you're not just looking at 1 year, you're looking at all 4 years. Okay, next slide, please. So Maria expects that when she graduates, her income or her earnings will be $50,000 a year. Now, we're going to deduct from that federal and state taxes. Plus, Maria definitely wants to have a savings plan, so she's going to deduct some money for that too. So the total of her federal and state taxes and her savings plan is going to be about 33%, or about a third of her anticipated $50,000 income. So we're going to say her basic salary, $50,000. We're going to deduct a third of that for her taxings and savings plan, and that's about $16,500. So that's going to leave her what we call a net income, or the income that she's able to use, of $33,500. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, her loan repayment should not be more than 10% of that net figure of $33,500. So 10% of that figure is $3,350 per year, right? That's the maximum that she should be looking to repay. So if we divide that figure by 12, that gives us repayments maximum of $279 per month. And I know this may sound a little complicated, but certainly when you get the PowerPoint, go over these figures. But essentially, this is telling us that she doesn't want her loan repayment to be more than $279 a month, or she's not going to be able to afford it. So based on that $279 a month, at an interest rate, we've said 4.5%, which is, about what it is at the moment. That means that the total amount that she can borrow should be up to, so certainly no more than $26,800. And I do want to remind you again, this is not per year of college. This is the total that she can borrow for her 4 years of college. So again, you need to divide that by 4, which is less than $7,000 per year of college, okay? And at this interest rate and borrowing this amount of money, with her repayment of $279 a month, it's actually going to take her 10 years to pay off that loan. So I know this was a little complicated, but again, the main thing to bear in mind here is that Maria is going to college for 4 years. She's hoping to earn $50,000 as soon as she graduates. And based on that figure, and bearing in mind that she also wants to allow for a little bit of a savings plan also when she graduates, she should not borrow in total more than $26,800 altogether over the 4 years, or less than $7,000 per year of college. And even at that, it will take her 10 years to pay off the loan. Okay, so again, go to the website that I mentioned, the Web Calculator website, and you'll be able to put in some figures of your own, and you'll see, it will help you to decide how much you can borrow. So that was a bit tricky. Does anybody have any questions related to Maria's debt or how you figure out what you can afford? All right, so if you have no questions, let's take it back to Bob. And the next slide, please.
Okay. So you think you want to look for a loan, and how do you approach finding a loan? The first place to start is looking at loans from the federal government. Why? Because normally the federal government is going to be offering the lowest interest rate. It will be a fixed interest rate, so you don't have to worry about it going up over time. And importantly, interest payments don't start until after graduation. So all you have to do as a student is focus on your other expenses in college and for living. There are other sources of loans, though. These are from private companies, and that can be a bank. But there are many other lenders which are not banks, but they specialize in student loans. And it's very easy to find them. If you just Google student loans, you will find enormous numbers. They normally have higher interest rates. They offer usually variable interest rates, although there are some of these specialized lenders who do offer fixed rate loans. The interest payments can start right away. In other words, the student is in college and the student has to start paying interest while still in college. So unlike Maria, who is waiting and doesn't need to start those payments until she graduates, some of these loans, you have to start the interest payments right away. And finally, a number of these private companies will expect what's called a cosigner, and I think that came up earlier. When a student doesn't have enough income, the lender wants somebody else to be the backup in case the student can't repay the loan. And so in effect, as a cosigner, if you co-sign on a loan, you are saying, if the student, the person who is named on this loan, cannot pay, I will. That's what that means. And this is not unusual to see when you're talking about a student loan, because these lenders know that the student is in college. The student normally doesn't have any income or has very little income from maybe a part-time job. And so for many of these lenders, they want, and usually it's a parent or somebody very closely related to the student, to have that kind of support. And keep in mind, and this probably won't surprise you from our credit card presentation, but credit cards should not be used to pay for college. Their interest rates, as you know, are very high, and you can get behind way too quickly. So this is not a good use of a credit card. With that, shall we go to the next slide? So let's say you're not able to get that federal US government loan, but you need some money. So how do I think about what the best private lender might be? Where to start is with your own financial situation. One of the reasons there are so many of these different student lenders is because they're specializing in different types of loans. So think about your specific situation. What is the amount of the loan? Why do you need that amount of money? What do you need? Do you need a variable rate or a fixed rate? That might, with one decision or another, that could change the amount of interest being charged, for example. So you need to think about the risk, if you will, of the variable rate can go up and down, but maybe I get a little bit lower interest rate compared to fixed, which will not change, but maybe that fixed rate will be a little bit higher. What you're going to have to do is think about your own circumstances and what would work best for your circumstances. A third factor is the amount of family support. Getting back to either co-signing, is there somebody to co-sign a loan, for example? Or is there somebody in the family that can offer additional financial support if you need it? That sort of, maybe not regularly, but maybe once a year, a little bit extra money. And finally, and most importantly, and to Anne's point, is what do you expect in the way of grants and scholarships? Besides the money that the student has earned, has saved, grants and scholarships should be investigated first. And then, of course, what's left is what you're going to think about as far as the loan that you're looking for. And then finally, the type of degree or the area of study. And if you're thinking, well, why would that matter? Well, this is going to determine the type of job you're going to get. If you think of it from the lender's perspective, for example, let's say you're studying to be an engineer. Well, that lender is going to guess that an engineer is, if you're a good engineer, maybe even if you're just an okay engineer, one, you're probably going to get a job in this country, and two, you might get a very well-paying job. So you are going to be considered a better credit risk, possibly, than what if you are studying because you want to be a musician. And you're a beautifully accomplished musician. But what kind of a job are you going to be able to get when you graduate? How hard will it be to get that job? And how much is that job going to pay? So that is a reason why these private lenders are going to be interested in the area of study, the type of degree that the student is getting. Now, where do you start? As always, on the internet. There's a remarkable amount of information on the internet. If you Google best student loan providers, that will get you to actually a number of websites. And what you can do is review these websites. First, the list of the loan providers, and what you will notice is you'll start to see that certain private lenders are good at the variable and the fixed rate, or versus the fixed rate loans. And some of these lenders are specializing in certain areas of study or whatever. So that's going to help you start to go through these lists. Then you can look at the websites of these lists of lenders and start to get an idea of what they're offering more specifically. And finally, that third step is, of course, to start to compare one website with another. And keep in mind that there are actually some websites that are trying to help you do a little bit of comparing. This best student loan providers is trying to do that a little bit by saying, well, this private lender does this really well, and that private lender does that really well. So that starts to help you. But I have to caution you, when you're going out online, whether you're looking at private lenders, whether you're looking at scholarship offers, whether you're looking at the grants, there's an enormous amount of information that you need to read through carefully. It's long. It's not easy reading. Anne is nodding because she and I have gone through some of these websites, and you need a piece of paper and a pen and a cup of coffee, and you need to just be patient and walk through the different options. And then when you come to something and you think, well, no, that won't work, that's one less. You can stop there, go on to the next one until you get the list that you need. But that's why it's so important to know your own circumstances, be clear on what you're looking for, because there's an enormous amount of information. But once you do get your list, you'll have a lot better idea of which way to go. And with that, back to Anne.
All right. So I do see that we have a couple of questions.
Oh.
If you don't, I'm going to hold those to the end because I think it will take a little more time to answer them. But do keep putting questions in the chat. We will absolutely get to them all. Okay. So let's just go on to now, how can I save for college? So we've talked a little bit so far about how do I get on to college when I want to start, but what about if I have a little while before I go to college, or if I have a child that I will want to send to college? How can I save for college? So there are many choices. So banks all have savings account choices. This is pretty obvious, but you know, whichever bank you use as your bank, you know, they'll have a savings opportunity for you. They have various kinds of savings available, and the larger the amount of money that you can put in, and the longer that you can leave it there, the better that the interest rate will be. Okay, so if I put in more money and I keep it there longer, my interest rate is liable to be higher. On the other hand, if I then have to suddenly make an early withdrawal, if I have to take it out before I promised I would, so for example, if I have something called a certificate of deposit, promised I'll leave it there for 2 years, if I take it out before the 2 years, there'll be a penalty for that early withdrawal and I'll lose some interest. Okay, just be careful that with these kinds of savings that are related to a certain amount of time that you have to keep it there, be sure that you can do that, otherwise it will cost you money. Now, a very good way of saving money is in what's called a 5-to-9 account. Almost every state has its own 5-to-9 account. So for example, the state of Maryland has one called the Maryland 5-to-9. Okay, so if you Google it, just Google Maryland 5-to-9, it will come right up. So this happens to be managed by an investment company, T. Rowe Price. All the states do have these accounts and all managed by different investment companies, okay? So these accounts are open to both children and adults. Sometimes there is one that is only open to children, and then a different one that is both children and adults. You have to be careful here because the ones that are open to children, that is usually somebody under about the age of 18, these are a particular type of 5-to-9, and they allow you to sort of prepay your college tuition. Also private school tuition and other kinds of education expenses, but they do allow you to prepay college tuition. One of the benefits of doing that you will then get your college tuition rate at a much cheaper rate than the rate, say, in 5 or 10 years when your child actually goes to college, okay? So you're kind of buying college tuition at a rate that is charged today, and so it will be cheaper than the rate when your child actually goes to college. So you're kind of prepaying college tuition or college credit. But you can only do that in the 5-to-9 that are for children, okay? Adults cannot use those. So please be careful when you're looking at these 5-to-9s that you're looking at the right kind of account for you. Okay, so the adult ones are something slightly different. And you may only use any of these accounts for education expenses, but that does include any kind of education expenses. So it can be a school. If your child is going to a parochial or private school, you can use it for those education expenses. Otherwise, any kind of tuition, any kind of textbook that you need for your school or college, and also room and board, okay? So you do have to be careful that you only use them for education expenses, okay? It's not allowed for other. The 5-to-9s will allow you to use some different investment options. So as Bob said, you know, I read through some of these and they are quite complicated, but you will be contacting perhaps the investment provider to give you some more information. So don't be off-put by the amount of pages you have to read. There is some help. All right. Usually the huge benefit of these accounts is that they are tax-free. Federal tax-free if used for education, and usually also state tax-free, but that can vary a bit. So again, be careful. If you live in Maryland and you use the Maryland 5-to-9, it is also state tax-free. And your contribution start at as little as $25. So if you have $25, you can open one of these. So I do also just want to point out here, the 5-to-9 accounts, you should Google carefully because like I said, every state has one. If you Google best 5-to-9 state accounts, I looked at many websites this week, and actually there is a plan in Ohio and there is a plan in New York and those are rated as the best plans in the country. So just because you live in Maryland doesn't mean you have to use the Maryland 529. You can certainly use the Ohio 529 or the New York 529. Just be a little careful, because sometimes, although they're always federal tax free, they may not be state tax free if you live in a different state. Okay, so you have to look at the details. And what you do with these accounts is you'll name the beneficiary. In your case, if you're going to college, the beneficiary will be you. However, if it's for a child, you can name your child as the beneficiary. If that child does not go to college, you simply change the beneficiary, okay? So now instead of being, you know, my daughter Mary, it can instead be my son Michael if Mary decides not to go to college. So you never lose this money. You can transfer it to other family members. But again, just be careful. You really need to be sure that somebody in the family is going to college. And if nobody ends up going, it simply means that when you withdraw the money, if it's not used for education, then you will have to pay taxes on it, okay? But otherwise, if used for education, it's tax-free. All right, the next slide, please. So those are really good plans, the 529 plans, but you know, you will need to do some careful Googling because they are quite complicated. So when you're accepted to college, what are you going to do? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to compare award letters. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I think I missed this. Okay, hold on. No, so when you're ready to apply to college, decide which schools meet your needs. Okay, so you'll have filled out college application. You'll have filled out the federal aid form. This is the federal grant aid form, and it's known as the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. You must fill this out as soon as possible because usually it's on a first come, first served basis, okay? So the earlier you can get it in, the better. And when you fill out that form, you will have to fill in at least the name of one college that you are applying to, okay? And then as you apply to more colleges, you will fill out those names also. And the federal government will then the form to all of the colleges that you have applied to, okay? So it's very important you know at least one college that you're applying to before you fill out that form. And it's the college that then gets in touch with you and lets you know how much money they're prepared to offer you using this federal grant aid money, okay? So you will need to fill it out early, and you will need to fill it out with knowing at least one college that you're going to apply to. So after you've filled out the FAFSA, that's the first thing you do, and then you will look around, as we said, for any other grant or scholarship money. So certainly Google on the internet, that is a really good way of finding all sorts of grants and scholarships. But also don't be afraid to go into the college that you're applying to, or even if you're applying to a couple of colleges, use all their financial aid offices, okay? Because they really do have a lot of resources, they have a lot of knowledge, they have a lot of information, and they are there to assist you, all right? So don't be afraid to use the college financial aid offices, and they will also be the perfect place to ask a lot of questions. All right, so do things in that order. Federal aid first, other grants and scholarships next. And of course, then private loans last if you need that. All right, next slide, please. So again, once you're accepted to college, you're going to be looking at what's called the award letters, and that's the letter that tells you how much money you're getting from the grant source. So you'll compare the award letters from different colleges, and that way you'll be doing your calculations, which one's giving me the best deal, which one can I actually afford, you know, which college do I really want to go to and can I afford it? You're going to, very importantly, look at how much you need to borrow based on how much you've been awarded. Okay, so if your awards are really good, they might cover a lot of your expenses. If your awards are not very good, that's when you may start having to look around for these private student loans. And you're really going to have to be careful in figuring out the loan repayments. And you're going to have to make yourself a budget. And you really have to be sure that you can afford it and that you're going to be able to repay it in a timely manner. All right, so quite a lot there, but again, we will answer all your questions at the end. So back to Bob, just to close us out.
Yeah, and we are almost at the end. We've covered a lot of ground today on grants, scholarships, different types of funding, how to find them, and how to calculate how much you can afford if you need to get a loan from a private lender on top of the other kinds of sources of money for college. And it all ties back to that plan, making that plan for which college, for what degree, and how you're going to get that all done. Keep in mind that there's still more to this group of presentations. So it isn't just college that is an option for learning more. Trade schools, continuing education are the other elements of this particular set that we're talking about. But we want to turn it over as quickly as we can now to the questions you might have about the material we covered today or even last week. So with that, what's in the chat box?
So Babak asked, I think, does the site for calculating the loan amount consider years of loan, interest rate, salary, etc.? So Bob, would you like to answer that? The web calculator, the loan calculator website?
Yeah, my understanding is that it offers options to input any one of these variables. And in fact, yes, you need to know, or you can model what's called model these different choices. If you know how much you can afford to spend, then you have to indicate what the interest rate is. And then you can also ask about the number of years of the loan as well. So it's a little bit like there are these calculators for if you want to buy a car, how to figure out how much you'll have to pay in loan payments. It's a similar tool to that, based on your personal information. Does that help? And I don't know, Anne, if you want to add anything.
So no, I think the key is just to go to the website and, you know, put in the figures and see if it's helpful. But usually you do have to kind of play around with it. But it does ask you for some information and then offers you, you know, some answers. So just play around with it a little bit and you'll see how it works. But it is well worth looking at. And we had another very interesting question. Bob, you might know the answer to this. I don't think I do. Are there special grants for immigrants?
Good question. And I was not able to find any. Probably grant would not be where you would find it, but a scholarship. I did not find any examples, though, of either grants or scholarships that are targeting immigrants. There are, for example, there are definitely scholarships for what is called first-generation students. So that means individuals, students who are coming from families where they are the first person in their family to want to go to college. So that might be an option for some people who are immigrants. But I didn't see anything that specified immigrants per se, which is not to say that there aren't any. It's just that was not a choice that I was able to find, at least when I was out looking at different options for these scholarship programs.